The Zephyrian fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic locusts, their bioships pulsing with bioluminescent threat displays. Admiral Kethvar watched through the neural link as his scouts transmitted data about the small human colony world below. Designation: New Terra. Population: roughly 2 million humans. Defense rating: minimal. Perfect. The Zephyrians had been expanding their empire for over 3 centuries, consuming worlds and species with methodical efficiency. Their philosophy was simple: the strong devoured the weak, and weakness deserved no mercy. They had encountered hundreds of species across the galaxy, and each had fallen within days or weeks of first contact. Some begged, some fought, some tried to negotiate. All eventually submitted or died. Humans, Kethvar had been told, were no different. A young species, barely reaching beyond their home system. Their technology was crude, their military laughably small, and their governments fragmented into countless petty factions. Intelligence reports suggested they spent more time fighting each other than developing proper defenses against external threats. Begin the descent, Kethvar commanded through the neural link. His massive form, standing nearly 12 feet tall with chitinous armor and, for powerful arms, radiated confidence. The bridge crew of his flagship responded immediately, their own insectoid bodies moving with practiced efficiency. The first wave of bioships descended through New Terra's atmosphere like falling stars. Each vessel was a living organism, bred specifically for warfare. Their hulls could regenerate from damage. Their weapons were organic projectile systems that fired hardened bone spikes at tremendous velocity, and their crews were genetically modified Zephyrian warriors who felt no fear and knew no mercy. New Terra's orbital defense platforms responded exactly as expected. Primitive kinetic weapons and crude energy beams lanced out toward the descending fleet. Most shots missed entirely. The few that connected splashed harmlessly against regenerating bioarmor or were absorbed by specialized defensive organs. Within 6 hours, the orbital stations were silent debris fields. The Zephyrian fleet took up position around the planet and began the standard procedure: mass bombardment of military installations, followed by ground assault to capture population centers, and, finally, the systematic breaking of the species will to resist. The human military bases on New Terra were pathetically small affairs. A few hundred soldiers here, a squadron of atmospheric fighters there, some ground vehicles that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a modern battlefield. The bioship's organic weapons made short work of these token defenses. General Sarah Martinez stood in the command bunker of Fort Harrison, watching her world burn through the tactical displays. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Chun, looked up from his console with desperation in his eyes. "Ma'am, we've lost contact with sectors 7 through 12. The aliens are systematically destroying every military installation on the continent." Martinez nodded grimly. She was a veteran of the human colonial wars, tough as nails and twice as sharp. But she had never faced anything like this. "Any word from the fleet?" "The Centauri squadron is still 3 weeks out. Admiral Thompson's task force won't arrive for at least a month." "And Earth Command?" Lieutenant Chin's expression darkened. They're calling it an acceptable loss, ma'am. They say New Terra is too far out to defend effectively." Martinez felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear of death. She had made peace with that possibility long ago. But the realization that Earth was abandoning them, abandoning 2 million civilians, ignited something else entirely. Something that burned hotter than fear and cut deeper than despair. Anger. Above the planet, Admiral Kethvar received reports from his ground commanders. The human military had been neutralized with minimal Zephyrian casualties. Now came the next phase, civilian pacification. The humans would be given a choice, as all species were: complete surrender and integration into the Zephyrian Empire as a slave species, or total extermination. Most species chose surrender. The few that chose death were quickly accommodated. Kethvar's personal transport, a massive creature that served as both ship and command center, descended toward New Terra's capital city of New Geneva. The city's skyline was typical for a developing human colony. Functional architecture reaching toward the sky, wide boulevards designed for ground vehicles, and the inevitable mix of industrial and residential districts that marked a growing civilization. Soon it would all belong to the Zephyrian Empire. The transport landed in the city's central plaza with a wet, organic sound. Thousands of humans had gathered, some fleeing in panic, others standing in defiant groups, and still others simply staring in shock at the alien vessel. Kethvar emerged from the bio-ship's opening sphincter, flanked by 24 of his elite guard. Each warrior carried weapons grown from modified bone and sinew, capable of tearing through modern armor like tissue paper. People of this world, Kethvar's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by bioelectric organs in his throat. I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Your military forces have been destroyed. Your orbital defenses have been eliminated. Your homeworld cannot reach you. And your colonial fleet is weeks away. He gestured with one of his 4 arms toward the burning skyline, where human military installations still smoldered. You have witnessed the futility of resistance. The Zephyrian Empire has conquered over 400 worlds. We have enslaved dozens of species. We have never known defeat. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some humans began backing away. Others stood their ground, though Kethvar could smell their fear through his enhanced olfactory organs. You will now choose, the Admiral continued. Submit to the Empire. Accept your role as a vassal species. Provide us with resources, labor, and tribute. In exchange, you will be permitted to live under our protection. And if we refuse? The voice came from the crowd. An older human male stepped forward, wearing what appeared to be civilian government attire. Mayor Davidson, if Kethvar's intelligence was correct. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. Then, you will be eliminated. Every man, woman, and child on this world will die. Your cities will be burned. Your history will be erased. Your species will be remembered only as another failed experiment in galactic evolution. Mayor Davidson stood silent for a long moment, looking around at the faces of his constituents. Kethvar had seen this moment hundreds of times before. The leaders always tried to appear strong for their people, but, in the end, they always chose survival over pride. We need time to consider, Davidson said finally. You have 6 hours, Kethvar replied. At sunset, you will announce your decision to your people. Choose wisely. As the Admiral and his guard returned to their transport, he felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful conquest. The humans would surrender, of course. They always did when faced with the reality of their situation. A few might resist at first, but once the executions began, the rest would fall in line quickly enough. What Admiral Kethvar did not know was that Mayor Davidson was not just a civilian administrator. He was a retired colonel from the human colonial marines, a veteran of 3 different conflicts, and a man who had seen what happened to colonies that tried to appease hostile forces. He also did not know that General Martinez had not died in the bombing of Fort Harrison. She had survived, along with most of her command staff, in the hardened bunker complex beneath the fort, and she was currently coordinating with every surviving military unit on the planet. Most critically, Admiral Kethvar did not understand something fundamental about human nature, something that would soon become very, very clear to him and his empire. Humans were pack animals. They formed bonds of loyalty and kinship that extended far beyond immediate family or tribal groups. When one human settlement was attacked, every other human settlement felt that attack as if it had been directed at them personally. And humans, unlike many species the Zephyrians had encountered, had a concept that was central to their nature: revenge. As the sun began to set over New Terra, Mayor Davidson stood once again in the central plaza. The Zephyrian transport loomed before him like a living mountain, its bioluminescent organs pulsing with alien rhythms. Admiral Kethvar emerged once more, confident in the outcome of this meeting. Well, the Admiral demanded. What is your answer? Davidson looked up at the towering alien warrior, then spoke in a clear, carrying voice that reached every human in the plaza and, through hidden recording devices, every human settlement on the planet. Our answer is no. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in surprise. You refuse? Even knowing the consequences? We refuse, Davidson confirmed. And I want you to remember something, Admiral. You came here expecting us to surrender because you thought we were alone. You thought we were weak. You thought we had nowhere to run and no one to help us. The mayor stepped closer to the massive alien, showing no fear despite being dwarfed by Kethvar's imposing form. You were wrong about all of those things. But, most importantly, you were wrong about who we are. Enlighten me, Kethvar said, his voice carrying an undertone of threat. Davidson smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. We're humans, and humans never forget. More than that, we never forgive. You've just made an enemy of every human being in the galaxy. Our children will remember your name. Our children's children will remember what you did here today. And someday, somehow, we will find you. Admiral Kethvar threw back his massive head and laughed, a sound like grinding stone and breaking glass. Brave words from a dead man. But words are all you have left. No, came another voice from the crowd. General Martinez stepped forward, still wearing her battle-damaged uniform. Somehow she had made it from the ruins of Fort Harrison to the capital. Words are just the beginning. Before Kethvar could react, the general raised a small device and pressed a single button. Across the planet, every human settlement simultaneously activated their emergency broadcast systems. The signal was powerful enough to reach beyond New Terra's atmosphere, beyond its star system, and into the vast network of hyperspace communication relays that connected human space. The message was simple: this is New Terra. We are under attack by a hostile alien empire calling itself Zephyrian. They have demanded our surrender. We refuse. Tell our people. Tell our families. Tell Earth. Remember us. Admiral Kethvar realized too late what had just happened. The humans had not spent their 6 hours debating surrender. They had spent those hours preparing to ensure their deaths would not go unnoticed or unavenged. Kill them all, he commanded his warriors. As the bioweapons began to fire, Mayor Davidson looked up at the Admiral one last time and spoke words that would echo across human space. See you in hell. Admiral Zhang Wei received the transmission from New Terra while reviewing fleet deployment schedules aboard the battleship Determination. The message played 3 times before the full weight of its meaning sank in. By the 4th replay, his hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. 2 million civilians. Gone. Zhang had been born on New Terra, had spent his childhood running through the forests outside New Geneva before his family moved to Earth for his military education. His sister had chosen to stay, raising her family in the colony's growing agricultural districts. Her last message to him had been about his nephew's graduation from the Colonial Academy. The communication officer, Lieutenant Torres, looked up from her console with tears streaming down her face. Sir, we're receiving similar reports from monitoring stations throughout the sector. New Terra's hyperspace beacon went dark 6 hours ago. Long-range sensors show massive energy signatures consistent with orbital bombardment. Any survivors? Zhang's voice was barely above a whisper. Unknown, sir. No communications have been received since the initial distress call. Admiral Zhang stood silent for several minutes, staring at the tactical display that showed New Terra's position relative to the human colonial fleet. 3 weeks away at maximum burn. They had been too far away to help when it mattered most. But they were not too far away to find answers. All ships, Zhang commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network. Emergency burn to New Terra coordinates. Maximum military speed. All shore leave is cancelled. All non-essential personnel report to duty stations immediately. Sir, came the voice of his chief of staff. Our orders from Fleet Command are to maintain position and await instructions. Zhang turned to face the man, his expression cold enough to freeze helium. My orders to you are to prepare this fleet for combat operations. If Fleet Command has a problem with that, they can court-martial me after we determine what happened to New Terra. Word of New Terra's fate spread through human space like wildfire. Earth's government initially tried to classify the information, but the colony's final transmission had been broadcast on open channels and received by dozens of civilian listening posts. Within days, every human settlement from the Sol system to the furthest colonial outposts knew what had happened. The response was immediate and unified in a way that surprised even the humans themselves. For the first time in over a century, the various human factions put aside their differences completely. Colonial militias began organizing into larger units. Corporate security forces volunteered for military service. Even the traditionally neutral scientific colonies started converting research vessels into warships. Dr. Elizabeth Cameron, head of xenobiological studies at the Mars Research Institute, found herself appointed to an emergency committee tasked with analyzing the limited information available about the Zephyrian Empire. The meeting room buzzed with barely contained energy as scientists, military officers, and intelligence analysts worked around the clock. "What do we know?" asked General Harrison, the committee's military liaison. Dr. Cameron pulled up a holographic display showing the fragment of New Terra's transmission that had captured images of the alien vessels. Preliminary analysis suggests their ships are biological constructs rather than traditional mechanical vessels. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Weaknesses? Harrison pressed. Unknown. We need more data. Cameron's expression was grim. But I can tell you this. Their technology appears to be significantly more advanced than ours. The fact that they were able to eliminate New Terra's orbital defenses so quickly suggests capabilities we're not prepared to counter. Admiral Thompson, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet, leaned forward. "Dr. Cameron, in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with here?" Cameron was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Based on the behavioral patterns described in New Terra's transmission, I believe we're facing a species that views conquest and subjugation as natural rights. They've clearly done this before, multiple times, and they've been successful enough to develop standardized procedures." "An empire," General Harrison said grimly. "More than that," Cameron replied. "A predator species that has evolved specifically to prey upon civilizations like ours. They're not just conquerors, they're hunters. And we just became their next target." 3 weeks later, Admiral Zhang's fleet arrived at New Terra to find exactly what they had feared. The planet's surface was scarred by massive bombardment craters. The once green continents were blackened wastelands. The orbital stations were debris fields drifting in slowly decaying orbits. And there were no human life signs anywhere in the system. Zhang stood on the bridge of the Determination, watching through the main viewer as reconnaissance drones transmitted footage of New Geneva's ruins. The city had been methodically destroyed, building by building. Worse, analysis of the destruction patterns suggested it had taken days to complete. The aliens had not simply killed everyone quickly. They had taken their time. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's on human frequencies." "From where?" "Unknown, sir. The signal appears to be originating from multiple locations across the planet's surface." Zhang nodded grimly. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was clearly not human. It carried harmonics and undertones that no human throat could produce, yet it spoke perfect standard English. "Human vessels. I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. You arrived too late to save your colony, as we knew you would. Your people fought bravely, but futilely. They are all dead." Zhang's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent. The alien voice continued. "We know you are listening. We know you are recording this message. Good. Take it back to your leaders. Tell them what happened here was a demonstration of Zephyrian power. Your species has precisely 1 standard year to present itself to the Empire for formal surrender. Refuse, and every human world will suffer the same fate as this one." There was a pause, then the voice took on what might have been amusement. "Your people's final words were quite touching. They spoke of revenge and remembrance. Children's fantasies. The Zephyrian Empire has existed for over 1,000 years. We have conquered hundreds of species, eliminated dozens of others, and enslaved entire star systems. What can one small, primitive species possibly do against such power?" The transmission ended, leaving the fleet in stunned silence. Admiral Zhang stared at the ruins of his homeworld for a long minute, then activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Zhang. Begin detailed scanning of the planetary surface. I want every piece of evidence collected, every energy signature analyzed, every piece of wreckage cataloged. We're going to learn everything we possibly can about these creatures." "Sir," his chief of staff asked quietly, "what are our orders regarding the 1-year ultimatum?" Zhang's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Our orders are to make sure that Admiral Kethvar learns the difference between children's fantasies and human reality." The investigation of New Terra took 6 weeks. Human science teams scoured every inch of the devastated world, collecting biological samples, analyzing weapon impacts, and reconstructing the timeline of the planet's final days. What they discovered changed everything humans thought they knew about warfare. Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, presented her findings to a joint session of the Solar Congress. Representatives from every human world watched as she displayed magnified images of biological material found at the impact sites. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kim began. The Zephyrian weapons are not technological constructs in any sense we understand the term. They are living organisms, specifically bred for warfare. Each projectile we've analyzed contains neural tissue, suggesting these weapons can actually think and adapt during flight. Murmurs ran through the assembly. Representative Walsh from the Alpha Centauri colonies raised her hand. Dr. Kim, are you suggesting their weapons are intelligent? More than that, Kim replied grimly. We've found evidence that some of the larger projectiles contain what can only be described as rudimentary memories. These weapons remember their targets. More disturbing still, analysis of the biological material suggests a level of genetic manipulation that implies centuries of systematic development. President Chun of the Earth Federation stood up. What does this mean for our defensive capabilities? Dr. Kim's expression was grave. Our current military technology is designed to combat mechanical threats. Energy shields, kinetic barriers, electronic countermeasures. None of these will be effective against biological weapons that can adapt and learn. We need to completely rethink our approach to defense. Admiral Rodriguez, representing the colonial fleet, leaned forward. Doctor, in your professional opinion, can we develop countermeasures in 1 year? Not with conventional approaches, Kim admitted. But there might be another way. The scientist activated a new display showing cellular breakdown patterns. The Zephyrian weapons and ship components we've analyzed all share certain biological characteristics. They're incredibly robust, capable of rapid regeneration and adaptation. But they also appear to be vulnerable to very specific types of biological agents. You're talking about biological warfare, President Chun said slowly. I'm talking about fighting biology with biology, Kim corrected. Every living system has weaknesses. The Zephyrians have obviously spent centuries perfecting their organic technology, but they've also created massive vulnerabilities. A properly designed biological agent could potentially devastate their entire fleet. Representative Martinez from the Mars colonies stood up. Dr. Kim, are you suggesting we develop plague weapons? I'm suggesting we develop targeted biological agents specifically designed to combat Zephyrian technology, Kim replied firmly. This isn't about creating indiscriminate weapons. This is about survival. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Ethicists argued against biological warfare. Military leaders pointed out that conventional weapons had proven useless. Political representatives worried about the precedent such weapons might set. Finally, President Chun called for order. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing potential extinction. The Zephyrians have given us 1 year to surrender or face total annihilation. Under these circumstances, I believe we have no choice but to authorize Dr. Kim's research. The vote was closer than many expected, but the authorization passed. Within days, every major research facility in human space had been converted to support what became known as the Genesis Project, the development of biological weapons specifically designed to combat Zephyrian technology. Dr. Elizabeth Cameron found herself leading a team of over 10,000 scientists working around the clock. The facilities on Mars were expanded into massive underground complexes. Similar installations were built in the asteroid belt, hidden within the outer planet's moon systems, and deep in the interstellar void where Zephyrian scouts would be unlikely to find them. The work was dangerous and often gruesome. Cameron's team analyzed every sample collected from New Terra, dissecting Zephyrian biological material down to the molecular level. They studied the aliens' regeneration capabilities, their adaptation mechanisms, and their apparent immunity to conventional weapons. Slowly, patterns emerged. They're too perfect, Cameron explained to her research team during one of their weekly briefings. The Zephyrians have engineered their biological systems to be incredibly resilient and adaptable, but they've also created dependencies. Their weapons and ships appear to rely on very specific biological processes. Dr. Martinez, the team's geneticist, nodded thoughtfully. It's like they've created a biological monoculture, incredibly efficient within their parameters, but potentially vulnerable to the right pathogen. Exactly, Cameron confirmed. And we're going to create that pathogen. The work continued for months. Human scientists pushed the boundaries of biological engineering further than any species had gone before. They created synthetic viruses that could target specific protein structures. They developed bacteria that could disrupt cellular regeneration processes. They engineered biological agents that could spread through organic networks like fire through dry grass. The Zephyrians, confident in their ultimatum, continued their expansion into other sectors. Intelligence reports suggested they had conquered 3 more civilizations during the year humans were supposedly preparing their surrender. Each conquest followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, complete destruction of resistance, and systematic elimination of any survivors who refused submission. Admiral Kethvar, now promoted to fleet commander for his successful conquest of New Terra, established a forward operating base in the NGC 4472 sector. From there, he planned to receive humanity's surrender and begin the process of integrating human space into the Zephyrian Empire. He was confident it would be a simple process. Humans had proven to be emotional and illogical, but they were not stupid. Faced with the reality of Zephyrian power and the complete futility of resistance, they would submit like every other species before them. On the final day of the year-long ultimatum, human ships began appearing throughout the sector where Kethvar waited. At first, there were only a few vessels, diplomatic ships flying flags of truce. But within hours, the sensor readings became confusing. There were hundreds of human ships converging on his position. Then, thousands. Kethvar had expected a small delegation arriving to formally surrender. Instead, he found himself facing the largest military fleet in human history. Every ship from every human world had gathered in this single system. The fleet stretched across millions of cubic kilometers of space, from massive dreadnoughts to converted civilian vessels bristling with hastily mounted weapons. And at the center of it all was a single message, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect Zephyrian. Admiral Kethvar, Fleet Commander, Destroyer of New Terra, Killer of Children, we have not come to surrender. We have come to collect a debt. Fleet Commander Kethvar stared at the tactical displays with growing unease. The human fleet was massive beyond anything his intelligence had suggested possible. Ship after ship continued emerging from hyperspace, taking positions around his fleet in what appeared to be a perfectly coordinated battle formation. How many? He demanded of his tactical officer. 15,000 vessels, and counting, Fleet Commander. Energy signatures suggest everything from military dreadnoughts to converted civilian ships. Kethvar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Large fleets were not uncommon in his experience. Desperate species often threw everything they had into final, futile battles. The humans were simply being more thorough about their suicide than most. Open communications, he commanded. The main viewer activated to show the bridge of what appeared to be the human fleet's flagship. Standing before the camera was an elderly human female wearing the uniform of their military. Her hair was silver white, her face lined with age and hardship, but her eyes burned with an intensity that Kethvar found mildly interesting. I am Fleet Commander Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire, he began, using his most intimidating tone. I assume you are here to formally surrender your species. The human woman smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. I am Admiral Elizabeth Santos, commanding the combined human fleet. And, no, Fleet Commander, we are not here to surrender. We are here to introduce you to a concept your species appears to have forgotten: consequences. Kethvar laughed, the sound echoing through his bioship's organic corridors. Admiral Santos, you command an impressive fleet. But impressive is not the same as effective. The Zephyrian Empire has faced larger forces before. They all made the same mistake you are making now. And what mistake is that? You believe quantity can overcome quality. You believe courage can defeat superiority. You believe that throwing enough ships at us will somehow change the fundamental reality of your situation. Kethvar gestured toward his own fleet displays. Admiral, I have over 2,000 bioships under my command. Each one is capable of regenerating from damage that would cripple or destroy your mechanical vessels. My weapons are alive, able to think and adapt to your defenses. My crews are genetically engineered for warfare, feeling no fear and knowing no mercy. Admiral Santos nodded thoughtfully. Yes, we learned quite a lot about your capabilities from studying the ruins of New Terra. Your biotechnology is indeed impressive. Then, you understand the futility of your position. On the contrary, Santos replied, her smile becoming genuinely predatory. We understand the vulnerability of your position. You see, Fleet Commander, while you were busy conquering other species this past year, we were busy studying you. Every sample, every piece of wreckage, every energy signature we could collect from New Terra was analyzed down to the molecular level. She paused, letting her words sink in. Did you know, Fleet Commander, that your bioships all share identical immune systems? That your weapons are all based on variations of the same core genetic template? That your entire military force is essentially one massive biological organism with thousands of different components? Kethvar felt the first stirring of unease. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Santos said firmly. I'm telling you directly. You've made a critical error in judgment. You assumed we would fight you the same way every other species has fought you. With conventional weapons, conventional tactics, conventional thinking. The Admiral leaned forward, her face filling the screen. But humans don't think conventionally, Fleet Commander. When faced with an impossible situation, we don't surrender. We adapt. And we've adapted specifically to fight you. Before Kethvar could respond, his bioship's internal sensors began registering anomalies. Microscopic objects were being launched from the human fleet, too small to be weapons, too numerous to track individually. They spread through space like a cloud of glittering dust, moving in patterns that seemed random, but somehow purposeful. What are you releasing? Kethvar demanded. Santos's smile widened. Judgment. The first signs of trouble appeared within minutes. Bioships throughout the Zephyrian fleet began reporting system malfunctions. Weapons ceased responding to neural commands. Regenerative processes slowed and stopped. Hull structures that should have healed from minor impacts remained damaged. Dr. Elizabeth Cameron watched the real-time data streaming in from the human fleet's observation ships. After a year of constant work, Project Genesis was finally being field-tested. The biological agents her team had developed were specifically designed to target the unique protein structures found in Zephyrian technology. Status report. Admiral Santos requested over the communication channel. Pathogen deployment successful, Cameron replied. Target organism immune responses are non-existent. They're completely vulnerable. Explain that in simple terms, Doctor. Cameron allowed herself a small smile of professional satisfaction. The Zephyrians spent centuries perfecting their biological technology, but they never developed proper biological security protocols. Their ships, weapons, and equipment are all essentially unprotected against targeted biological attacks. It's like they're all the same organism with no immune system. Fleet Commander Kethvar was receiving increasingly desperate reports from throughout his fleet. Ships were losing mobility as their biological engines began shutting down. Weapons were becoming unresponsive. Worst of all, the damage was spreading from ship to ship through the bioneural networks that connected his fleet. Medical analysis. He commanded his chief bioengineer. Unknown pathogen, Fleet Commander. It appears to target our core biological systems specifically. Regeneration is impossible. The pathogen prevents cellular repair at the molecular level. Kethvar turned back to the communication screen, where Admiral Santos waited patiently. What have you done? What you taught us was necessary, Santos replied coldly. You wanted us to understand that the strong devour the weak. You wanted us to learn that mercy is weakness. You wanted us to accept that conquest and subjugation are natural rights of superior species. She gestured toward something off-screen. Congratulations, Fleet Commander. Your lessons were very effective. Throughout the Zephyrian fleet, bioships began dying. Not destroyed by weapons fire, but simply ceasing to function as their biological systems collapsed. The organic hulls that had been their greatest strength became their fatal weakness as the engineered pathogens spread through their structures like cancer. Kethvar watched in horror as ship after ship went dark. His own flagship was beginning to show signs of infection. The bioneural networks that allowed him to command his fleet were failing one by one. "This is biological warfare," he said, his voice carrying undertones of disbelief. "Your species has violated every convention of civilized conflict." Admiral Santos laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Civilized conflict? Fleet Commander, you exterminated 2 million civilians on New Terra. You told us you had enslaved dozens of species and eliminated dozens of others. You gave us 1 year to surrender or face total extermination." Her expression became deadly serious. "You wanted to teach us about the reality of galactic power structures. Mission accomplished. We've learned that there are no rules in this game. No conventions. No mercy. Only survival." The Admiral stood up, her full height visible on the screen. "We've also learned something else, Fleet Commander. Something your empire apparently never figured out in its 1,000-year history." "What?" "Humans are very, very good at learning." As if to emphasize her point, the biological attack entered its second phase. The pathogens that had been attacking Zephyrian technology began producing secondary compounds, engineered specifically to disrupt the neural control systems that Zephyrian crews used to interface with their ships. Throughout Kethvar's fleet, bioship crews began losing consciousness as their neural links failed. Warriors who had been genetically modified for perfect combat effectiveness found themselves unable to coordinate their actions. Some ships simply drifted powerless as their crews fell into comas. Others began firing randomly as their weapon systems lost proper neural guidance. Dr. Cameron monitored the biological attack from her command station. "Admiral, the secondary pathogen is performing exactly as designed. Zephyrian neural interfaces are shutting down across their entire fleet. Casualties: among their biological technology, 100%. Among their personnel." Cameron paused, checking her readings. "The secondary pathogen appears to be non-lethal to Zephyrian biology. They're unconscious, but vital signs remain stable." Admiral Santos nodded approvingly. Despite everything the Zephyrians had done, she had not wanted to commit genocide. The pathogens had been designed to destroy their technology while leaving the beings themselves alive. Defeated, helpless, but alive. It was more mercy than they had shown New Terra. Fleet Commander Kethvar felt his own neural links beginning to fail as the pathogen spread through his flagship's biosystems. Around him, his bridge crew was collapsing one by one as their enhanced neural interfaces succumbed to the biological attack. With enormous effort, he maintained his connection to the communication system long enough to send one final transmission. "This is Fleet Commander Kethvar to all Zephyrian vessels. Withdraw immediately. Retreat to Imperial space. Report what has happened here to the High Command." His vision was beginning to blur as the neural toxins reached his brain. Tell them the humans are not what we expected." The transmission cut off as Kethvar lost consciousness. Admiral Santos watched as the last Zephyrian ship went dark. Across the vast battlefield, thousands of bioships drifted powerless, their organic hulls already beginning to decompose as the engineered pathogens completed their work. "Status of Zephyrian personnel?" she asked. "All readings show stable life signs," Dr. Cameron reported. "The secondary pathogen has rendered them unconscious, but otherwise unharmed. They should recover completely within 48 to 72 hours. "Good." Santos activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Santos. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Begin recovery operations. I want every Zephyrian survivor transferred to secure medical facilities. They are to be treated as prisoners of war and given full medical care." She paused, looking out at the debris field that had once been a mighty fleet. "And I want every piece of biological material collected for analysis. Dr. Cameron's team is going to reverse engineer their entire technology base." Lieutenant Chun, her communications officer, looked up from his console. "Admiral, what about the Zephyrian Empire? This was just one fleet. According to their own statements, they control hundreds of worlds." Santos smiled grimly. "Then, we'd better get to work. Contact Earth Command. Tell them we need immediate authorization for Operation Payback." "Operation Payback, ma'am?" "Phase 2 of our response to the Zephyrian ultimatum," Santos explained. "They wanted to know what one small, primitive species could do against their empire. We're about to show them." Over the following months, human fleets began appearing in Zephyrian space. But these were not the crude mechanical ships the Empire expected. Human engineers had reverse-engineered captured Zephyrian technology, improving it with human innovations and strengthening it against biological attacks. More importantly, every human ship now carried biological weapons specifically designed to neutralize Zephyrian technology. The Empire's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. World after world fell to human forces. Zephyrian biofleets that had conquered hundreds of species found themselves helpless against engineered pathogens. The empire that had existed for 1,000 years began collapsing in a matter of months. But the humans did not simply conquer. They liberated. Every species the Zephyrians had enslaved was freed. Every world they had subjugated was given back its independence. The humans offered alliance and assistance, but never demanded submission. Fleet Commander Kethvar eventually recovered from his exposure to the neural toxin, only to find himself a prisoner aboard a human medical vessel. He was treated well, given proper food and medical care, and allowed to observe human operations throughout Zephyrian space. What he saw confused him. The humans were winning. Their technology was now superior to anything the Empire possessed. Their fleets were larger and more effective than any force the Zephyrians had ever assembled. They had every opportunity to become conquerors themselves, to build their own empire on the ruins of the Zephyrian domain. Instead, they were giving it all away. During one of his interviews with human intelligence officers, Kethvar finally asked the question that had been troubling him. "Why?" he said simply. Captain Morrison, the intelligence officer conducting the interview, looked up from her notes. "Why what, Fleet Commander? Why are you not conquering? You have defeated the Empire. You have proven your superiority. Why do you not claim what you have won by right of victory?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about how to answer. Finally, she said, "Fleet Commander, do you remember what you told the people of New Terra? About the strong devouring the weak? Yes. You were wrong. That's not how strength works among humans. Real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." She stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "We didn't come out here to build an empire, Fleet Commander. We came to make sure no one ever does to another species what you did to New Terra." Kethvar considered this for a long time. "And my people, the Zephyrians who remain, will be given the same choice we give everyone else," Morrison replied. "Learn to live peacefully with your neighbors, or be stopped by whatever force is necessary. But we won't exterminate you. We won't enslave you. We won't even exile you, if you can prove you've truly changed." "Why?" Captain Morrison turned back to face him. "Because, Fleet Commander, we're humans. And humans believe in second chances." She paused at the door as she prepared to leave. "But, just so we're clear, Fleet Commander, this is your second chance. There won't be a third." Years later, when historians studied the fall of the Zephyrian Empire and the rise of the human Commonwealth, they would identify the moment when everything changed. It wasn't the battle in the NGC 4472 sector. It wasn't the development of biological weapons or the reverse engineering of Zephyrian technology. It was the moment when Mayor Davidson of New Terra looked up at Admiral Kethvar and said, "See you in hell." Because that was the moment the Zephyrians learned something that every other species in the galaxy would eventually discover. Humans keep their promises. All of them. Even the ones that seem impossible to keep. Especially those ones. The Zephyrian Empire had taught humans about the nature of galactic power. They had demonstrated that strength was the only currency that mattered in the universe. They had shown that mercy was weakness, and that conquest was a natural right of superior species. The humans had learned those lessons well. And then, they had taught the galaxy something new. That sometimes the student becomes the teacher. That sometimes the prey becomes the predator. And that sometimes, just sometimes, justice arrives exactly when it's needed most. The Zephyrian Empire lasted 1,000 years. The human memory lasted longer. Admiral Kethvar had asked what one small, primitive species could possibly do against such power. The answer, as it turned out, was simple. Everything.